Vampires may turn to dust when killed, but one thing remains behind: their fangs. Jenna Lehane, Hunter. I ignored the clop-clop of horse hooves on cobblestones and the rattle of carriages. It wasn't the first time I'd heard or seen things from another era, but I had to admit that the ghostly sounds fit this medieval city. Bruges was a city frozen in time. From the cobblestone streets to the building facades and stone bridges that arched across a network of canals, walking in Bruges was like stepping into the past. No wonder the monsters liked it here. Immortals dislike change. Human tourists may come here for the novelty, but I wouldn't be surprised if this place was a hot spot for ancient fae and centuries-old vampires. For the long-lived, Bruges would feel like home, if home included some very large waterfowl. "What's with all the swans?" I asked. There were dozens of swans swimming in the canal and lounging on the grass verge to our left. I imagine the scene probably seemed idyllic to most of the city's visitors, but I let out a heavy sigh. The feathers of at least half of the swans shimmered. Bruges was home to a flock of swan maidens. Swan maidens, both male and female, were shape-shifting fae. Like the selkie, their saltwater cousins, the swan maidens' ability to change shape is tied to their skins. I scanned the banks of the canal, spying a cluster of feathers at the base of a tree. At least one swan maiden walked amongst us. I chided myself for not reapplying fairy ointment once I'd landed in Belgium. The ointment I'd put on in Harborsmouth had worn off, leaving me blind to fairy glamour, but TSA rules restricted liquids on board the plane. I'd packed my ointment with my sword, not thinking I'd need it so soon. I was wrong. My fingers itched to tear into the ski bag strapped across my back, but I left it for now. There was no easy way to get into the container without risking someone seeing my sword. I'd gather what information I could from Ash until I could find a private place to retrieve the fairy ointment. At least swan maidens are relatively harmless. They give off pheromones that fill humans with feelings of love and contentment, but as far as mind control goes, that's nothing. Some hunters speculate that it's a defensive mechanism, and I'd have to agree. The love not war vibe that they were pumping out was pretty damn strong. I blinked and focused on Ash's words.
In a revolt against Maximilian of Austria, the people of Bruges captured Maximilian and his advisor Pieter Lanchels, he said.
The feathers in Ash's hat fluttered with his broad hand gestures.
The townspeople made Maximilian watch as they tortured Lanchels for 2 days.
Ash was animated, but he didn't seem affected by the swan maiden's pheromones. At least he wasn't staring at me with goo-goo eyes. Probably because the pheromones just amplified the fact that he was in love with himself. He certainly liked the sound of his own voice. "Does this really have anything to do with swans?" I asked.
I'm getting to that, he said. Right, so Lanchels was tortured for days until finally he was beheaded.
He pulled a finger across his throat, eyes rolling back as he flopped his head to the side. But sadly, his hat defied gravity, staying on his head. I frowned, wishing the man could just convey the facts without flamboyant theatrics. I rolled my hand for him to get on with it.
Lanchels' head was put on a pike out on the Jeanport, one of the city gates, for all to see, he said. It would have been a bloody mess, and when Maximilian got free and regained power, he didn't toss about. He threatened the entire city with a curse.
I leaned forward. Now that sounded interesting, even if Ash had seemed to forget we were supposed to be discussing waterfowl. A curse? I asked. Ash nodded excitedly.
The name Lanchels means long neck, and the man's family crest was a swan, he said. So, Maximilian threatened that the city must keep swans in the canals of Bruges for all eternity, or face the consequences of the curse.
What consequences? I asked. Ash shrugged.
Don't think anyone ever wanted to find out, he said, gesturing to the gaggle of swans.
Sounded like Pieter Lanchels was a swan maiden, and Maximilian had found a way to protect Lanchels' flock from the superstitious townsfolk. I cast the birds a wary eye, not liking the numbers, but at least the swans weren't all fae. Not all of the birds shimmered or moved with unearthly grace. A swan with plain white feathers waddled across the grass and hopped inelegantly into the canal.